Hey everybody, my name is Michael McDowell with Hinge Education. So excited to be with you. This is just a brief spring update. We've had so much going on. We've been doing podcasts, we've had book releases, we've been doing work internationally, we've been doing work on the East Coast, and this is really the first day that I've been back actually at home in about 6 to 8 weeks. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about the work that we've been doing and where we think this is going. And so this is just a bit of our spring update. We have really been trying to shrink our work into like three kind of doable key areas that we think have been really helpful for the clients that we've been working with when we were going with schools. And it really kind of boils down to these kind of three key ideas, which is how do we make sure teams can learn high impact instructional routines, small and doable, that teams can turnkey? Because what we've seen is that a lot of school systems have been investing in middle leadership. And what we mean by that are department leads, grade level team leads, assistant principals, where the principals can actually support their assistant principals and being able to then support their department leads. And so these department leads are looking at, okay, well, how do I then go and build capacity, whether this is like a full day professional development meeting, whether it's a half day staff meeting, or I'm going in, I'm going to be working with my department. How do we make sure that we know those instructional routines and then how to teach others in doing that? Number two, how do we leverage PLCs to actually get the work happening? We spend a lot of time in our PLCs on that question 1 and 2, like what do we want students to know? How will we know? But how do we actually get that into action? And when we plan, how do we make sure planning isn't just sequencing? It isn't just pacing, but it's actually how do we teach through tier one? And then the third is working with leaders. So those principals, assistant principals, principals, and system leaders on how do we actually make sure that we can sustain this work over time. And our professional learning has really been centered around this work from that we see in medicine, and it was popularized through the Huberman Lab, a great podcast around see one, do one, teach one. So when we've been going out and doing professional development, we've been modeling the practice, having everyone do that practice together, but then having people actually teach that to one another prior to then going out and employing this with their teams. And I'm going to show you some data just right at the end of this that show that this has actually been very promising in terms of it's small and doable. And people actually are not only doing the work, but they're actually retaining these particular types of practices. So this C1 is a structured observation and analysis. So we show all of the specific steps. We then do that. We do some level of implementation and get some feedback around it. And then we share that expertise by teaching each other so that then they can go out and they can turnkey that either with students or with their grade level team leads. We also, anything that we're doing around learning those particular routines, we're just making those practices doable, that it's starting small, that we can sustain it, that it's not an event, it's an actual routine, that we can link this to what we're currently doing. We can link this to our current practice. We make sure that we're not adding more. We can actually reduce a couple of our practice so that we can make some time for this. We look at sprinting, which is this idea of testing an idea, but not trying to scale it immediately. So let's test it. Let's get used to it. Let's get comfortable with it. And then we'll scale it to everyone in all of our different grade levels or different sections or different disciplines that we might be working with. And then we're going to come back and we're going to share our impact with others. And so when we've been doing this professional learning, we've been spending a lot of time on this, and we have found high levels of success. I was with a team a few weeks ago when we were looking at brand new teachers, and we were looking at these types of practices, and it was not overwhelming. People were looking at this being like, that's doable. Same with veterans. When I'm working with veteran teachers or veteran assistant principals and assistant superintendents and superintendents on this being kind of a key focus for us on this notion of habit size. So let's keep it simple and let's make it impactful. We've also been spending time looking at instructional practices that help students develop their high progress and high proficiency. So what do we do when students are low proficient? What do we do when students are high proficient? What do we do when they're low proficient, but they're not showing high levels of progress? What about those dispositional practices that help kids learn how to learn? Such as being assessment capable or developing clarity. And so we've been spending time trying to figure out, well, what are those practices that sit within these specific areas? And that's where a lot of our practices have been, where we've been focusing. So we have teams come in and say, well, we have students that are highly proficient, but they're not growing, Michael. We need some practices there. So when we're with our PLCs and we're trying to come up with a strategy, a routine we can use, we need to know some of those routines, because maybe in your professional development, when you were getting your credential or going through your graduate school work, you weren't working a lot on high proficient, low growth students. It was probably a lot of intervention. So what do we do there? Or maybe we haven't done a lot of work around dispositions. So we look at this continuum of proficiency and progress and we try to figure out, okay, well, given the data, where should we go? We pick a couple of strategies and then we go in there. And I have a math video I'm going to show here in just a little bit on one of those practices that we've been using because I've been doing a lot of work recently in mathematics in particular. And what are those practices we can use for students that are struggling with word problems, but they may have proficiency in procedural fluency? And so you can see here there's a URL and a QR code, and I'll also put it into the notes on my LinkedIn page if you'd like to access these particular practices that you could use within your PLC to try to figure out, okay, where do we need to go? And then do we have the actual practices? And what we've been doing is really boiling down those routines into 4 doable steps. So there's a little bit of a comic, there's a description, and then we do that: see one, do one, teach one. And that's been really, really helpful where I walk through the 4 steps, then we all do those 4 steps together, and then we go out and we teach that together, and then we go out, people teach that, and then through our coaching and through that support, we start to develop more comfort in terms of implementing it, getting better at that implementation, and then sustaining it over time. We then go in and we work on our PLCs around really kind of around 4 key questions that are really centered around need it. Like, what do we need? See it. How would we see the observable change? Start it. How do we make it small and doable and show it? How will we see the impact? And so a lot of our work with PLCs is just that: need it, see it, start it, show it. We make it super simple, lean. It probably will only take us somewhere in the ballpark of like 20 to 40 minutes to go through those 4 questions to make it very quick and like, let's get back out and let's go to implement. Let's look at the data, let's go back and implement, and not trying to make it too big. We have to make this process much more agile so that it actually works in the busyness of our lives. And so we use that matrix of that progress and proficiency in order to run that. And then we work with leaders on a leadership checklist. It's a couple of things we check in with. So when you think about, I have to fly a lot. So when you get on the airplane, you want your pilots to be, doing those checks. We just want to make sure our goals align with the factors that drive learning. Do we have systems to monitor progress and take action? Are we prioritizing tier 1, or are we trying to intervene our way to instruction? We need to make sure that we are focusing in on tier 1. Are we making high impact practices a habit in our classrooms, not just an event, but a habit? Are we sustaining growth through our capacity building programs? And then are we developing those personal and team leadership habits that enable us as leaders to make sure that the systems are humming? And that's the work we've been doing, and we have found a lot of success. We worked with a large system for a number of years in Australia, and we worked with a set of school middle leaders and principals. And what we found is that by going through this professional learning, we saw a higher uptake of engaging in certain practices, both from the leadership standpoint, but also the teachers that they were leading. And these are teachers leading other teachers as well as administrators. We found that people were very satisfied with the professional learning, and they went and deployed it, and they stuck with those particular practices. And we found students actually improving in their learning, which is ultimately what we want to be able to do. And this was a large sample size. We had 11 schools in total, and those schools engaged with this over a year, and we found high levels of impact. We also had another school district here in the United States, and we had a team that learned these particular practices, and then they had to go out and teach those practices, doing that see one, do one, teach one. And what we found in the primary school is that of the respondents, 94.5% of those that received that training from their own staff were likely to continue to do that in primary school. And they looked at lots of interesting practices, including work sample protocol, which helps with clarity, the silent protocol, also a clarity-based work, backward fading, wonderful high impact strategy in terms of the guided practice. We see this often in mathematics, but you can see it in lots of different practices. And then other things like final word protocol, which is a great reading and listening strategy, slow reveal graphs, which is a wonderful practice to help students with sense making and problem solving. And then pictures worth 1,000 words, which is just a great way to help students with complexity of conversation, of dialogue, and really helps them with their reading, writing, and talking. And then when you look at secondary, so same district, and we saw that 88.1% of respondents that had engaged in the practice, and again, that was 65.9% that regularly were engaging in a particular or had not used it, but then now are using that practice. 88.1% are going to stick with this practice in secondary schools. So we're finding a high level of impact of doing this work. And the three things that we've been focusing on is let's learn these routines. Let's leverage our PLCs and let's really lead the impact in small and doable ways. And that has been a high level of success for us in seeing people engaging in practices that are at standard, like the search and unseen questions, the because but so, which is a way of taking the Hockman method, the Hockman and Wexler method, and building this into a turn and talk that is small and doable that we could do each day to really be able to improve classroom discussion and really be able to exceed what we've seen in a lot of classroom discussion research. And it's been kind of fun. Like people have actually really been enjoying this particular work while we've been doing the professional learning. So that's what we've been working on. That's what we've been doing over the last 2 months or so, I would say, since we came back from winter break. And we're about to go back out and start to deploy that with a lot of new districts that have come on board to work with this in this way that's just small and doable. So we've been working with districts on really kind of mapping this out, like where do we need to see these routines. We basically do somewhat of a kind of a heat map on, where are we seeing those particular opportunities for growth? How do we leverage teachers to be able to turnkey this with other teachers so that you can actually sustain this? How do we make sure those PLCs are really humming and not just doing the question one and two, but actually going and taking that action and then supporting leaders and being able to lead this work over time? And those three steps have really been helping us and are helping the teams and helping us be able to help them with that particular work. So we're really excited about the work. If you have any questions, please jump on to hingeeducation.org. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Thanks, everybody. Take care.